Welcome, the haunted tale's brave souls, to another terrifying journey into the unknown. Tonight, we venture deep into the heartland of America, where restless spirits roam, and echoes of the past refuse to fade. Indiana may be known for its rolling fields and quiet towns, but beneath the surface lies a history drenched in horror. Join us as we explore the most haunted places in Indiana, if you dare. Whispers of Central State. The old hospital loomed in the darkness, its skeletal remains jutting against the moonlit sky like broken teeth. Central State Hospital had once been Indiana's largest psychiatric facility, a sprawling campus that housed thousands of patients, some seeking help, others discarded by society. The doors had been locked for years, yet the stories of what had happened inside never stopped. Brandon didn't believe in ghosts. He was a thrill seeker, a YouTuber chasing the next viral urban exploration video. That's why he and his girlfriend, Jess, stood before the crumbling red brick facade of Central State at midnight, their breath fogging in the cold autumn air. "This is stupid," Jess muttered, tugging her hoodie tighter. "You know people say this place is cursed, right?" Brandon grinned, hoisting his camera. "That's what makes it good content. If we see something, we go viral. If we don't, we still get a cool video. Win-win." Jess rolled her eyes but followed him anyway. The front doors were boarded up, but they found a broken basement window that provided an easy entry. Sliding through, they landed on a cold concrete floor. The smell hit them immediately: mold, dust, and something older, something rotten. Jess flicked on her flashlight, illuminating rusted wheelchairs, broken gurneys, and old medical equipment stacked like forgotten relics. The air was thick with silence, punctuated only by the distant dripping of water. "Creepy as hell," Brandon whispered, adjusting his camera. "This place shut down in the 90s, but it's been abandoned way longer than that." Jess stayed close as they moved deeper. The basement was filled with long-forgotten lobotomy tools, electroshock machines, and dusty medical records strewn across the floor. Brandon lifted a chart. "Check this out. Patient 2347, committed for hysteria in 1921. Treatment? Ice baths, isolation, and oh, lovely, experimental surgeries." Jess shuddered. "This place should be torn down." They moved up the winding staircase, the steps groaning beneath their weight. On the second floor, the air grew colder. The hallways stretched into darkness, lined with open doorways leading into decayed patient rooms. Some doors were still locked from the outside. Jess swallowed hard. "They locked people in?" "Yeah," Brandon said. "Patients who were dangerous or just unwanted." They pressed on. Faded murals of pastoral landscapes and smiling faces adorned the walls, a twisted contrast to the reality of what had happened here. Then, a whisper, soft, indistinct. Both froze. Jess grabbed Brandon's arm. "Did you hear that?" Brandon's heart pounded. He scanned the corridor. "It's probably just the wind." The whisper came again. Closer, a child's voice. "Help me!" Jess gasped. "Brandon!" Something darted across the hallway. A small, pale figure vanishing into one of the rooms. Brandon lifted his camera, shaking. "Tell me you saw that." Jess nodded, her face drained of color. "Let's go. Now." But Brandon, drawn by the need for proof, moved forward. He pushed open the door where the figure had vanished. Inside, the room was nearly empty, save for a rusting bed frame and deep scratches along the walls. Then the door slammed shut. Jess screamed, rushing to yank it open. It wouldn't budge. Brandon stumbled backward, his camera shaking. The air was ice cold now, his breath visible. The whispers rose, guttural, urgent, layered voices speaking over one another in frantic desperation. Then footsteps, not just one set. Dozens, echoing from the hallway, from the walls, from the floor above. Brandon pounded on the door. "Jess! Get me out of here!" Jess yanked at the handle, sobbing. "It won't open!" Then the whispers stopped. Silence. A beat. Then a shriek exploded through the room, rattling the walls. Brandon fell to his knees, clutching his ears. The room was shaking, dust and debris raining from the ceiling. Then the door burst open. Jess pulled him out, dragging him down the hall. The whispers returned, angrier, more frantic. Hands seemed to reach out from the darkness, clawing at them. They sprinted down the stairs, nearly tripping in their panic. They crashed through the basement and scrambled out of the broken window, gasping for air. The hospital loomed behind them, silent once more. Brandon's camera was still recording. He checked the footage with trembling fingers. His breath caught in his throat. In the hallway, just behind him, a figure stood. Pale, sunken eyes. Mouth sewn shut. Arms stretched out in silent pleading. And then, just before the door had opened, a hand had yanked it from the other side. But Jess had been outside. So who had let him go? Either of them ever returned to Central State. But the whispers never left them. And at night, when the world was silent, they swore they could still hear someone calling their name. "Help me!" The haunting of French Lick Springs Hotel nestled in the rolling hills of southern Indiana. The French Lick Springs Hotel stood as a grand testament to luxury and history. Its golden domes gleamed beneath the sun, a relic of the opulence of the past. But beneath its gilded charm lay secrets. Whispers of ghostly figures roaming the halls, strange echoes in the dead of night, and a legend that refused to fade. Kara Jennings had always been fascinated by the supernatural. A freelance journalist with a passion for ghost stories, she had traveled to haunted locations across the country. But nothing intrigued her more than the tales surrounding the French Lick Springs Hotel. Stories of spectral bellboys, shadowy figures in mirrors, and the lingering presence of its most infamous resident, Thomas Taggart, the former owner, who was said to still oversee the hotel even in death, had drawn her here. She checked into the hotel on a chilly October evening, the lobby bathed in the golden glow of antique chandeliers. The receptionist, an older woman with sharp blue eyes, gave her a knowing smile. "Here for the ghosts?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. Kara grinned. "You could say that." The receptionist slid the room key across the counter. "Room 531. You might get a visit if you're lucky." Kara raised an eyebrow. "From Taggart?" The woman simply chuckled. "You'll see." A room with a presence. The room was lavish, with vintage decor that transported Kara to another era. She unpacked her equipment, a digital recorder, an EMF detector, and her notebook. As the sun set beyond the hills, she began her investigation. She wandered the halls, feeling the weight of the past pressing in on her. The grand ballroom stood empty, yet she swore she heard the faint notes of a piano. Her breath hitched as she followed the sound, but as she stepped into the room, it was silent. At the bar, she met an elderly man nursing a bourbon. He introduced himself as Henry, a former bellhop who had worked at the hotel for decades. "They say Taggart still runs this place," Henry said, swirling his drink. "He was a man of order, didn't like things out of place." "Have you ever seen him?" Kara asked. Henry chuckled. "Not directly, but I've felt him. The elevators run by themselves, the scent of cigar smoke lingers in empty rooms, and sometimes you hear footsteps in places where no one is walking." Kara leaned in. "What's the scariest thing you've experienced here?" Henry's eyes darkened. "Room 531. That's where he lingers the most. Guests report feeling watched, doors locking on their own, and sometimes they wake up to see a shadowy figure standing at the foot of their bed." Kara's stomach tightened. That was her room. A night of terror. Determined to capture evidence, Kara set up her equipment and turned off the lights. She lay in bed, recorder running, waiting for something, anything, to happen. At 2:17 a.m., the temperature in the room plummeted. Her breath became visible in the dark, and the scent of cigar smoke filled the air. The EMF detector on her nightstand spiked erratically. Then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, she gripped her recorder, her pulse hammering in her ears. The footsteps stopped at the foot of her bed. She reached for her phone to take a picture, but as she lifted it, the screen went black. A whisper broke the silence. "Leave." The voice was low, guttural, and right next to her ear. Kara bolted upright, fumbling for the lamp. The moment the light flooded the room, the cold vanished. The scent of cigars was gone. But she felt it. Something had been there. The final warning. The next morning, shaken but exhilarated, Kara played back the recorder. The whisper was there, clear as day. "Leave." She packed her things, but before she left, she stopped by the lobby and approached the receptionist. "I think I met Taggart," she said. The woman nodded, as if it was nothing new. "He only warns people once." Kara frowned. "And if they don't listen?" The receptionist gave her a tight-lipped smile. "They don't come back." Whispers in the dark. The old Victorian house stood at the end of the street, its once pristine white siding now cracked and peeling, the shutters hanging loose like broken limbs. It loomed over the neighborhood, a silent predator watching, waiting. Lucas had read about Whisper's estate before. The stories told of ghostly figures, eerie whispers in the dead of night, and objects moving on their own. It was said that Dr. John and Jesse Gibbons, the original owners, had suffered great tragedies there, most notably, their adopted daughter Rachel, who had burned to death in one of the upstairs rooms. But Lucas wasn't just here for a tour. He was here to stay the night. "You sure you want to do this, man?" Ethan asked, his grip tight on the steering wheel as they pulled up to the house. Lucas smirked. "Scared?" Ethan scoffed but didn't answer. As they stepped out, the air grew noticeably colder. The realtor, a woman named Mrs. Holloway, was waiting for them at the entrance. "This house has history," she said carefully. "People have left in the middle of the night. Some have even refused to come back for their things." Lucas exchanged a glance with Ethan but shrugged it off. He loved paranormal investigations, and this was the perfect place to test his limits. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and something faintly burned. Dust coated the furniture, and shadows stretched long in the dim lighting. Mrs. Holloway handed them the keys. "I'll be back in the morning. If you hear things, try not to answer." Ethan laughed uneasily. "Answer what?" She hesitated before saying. The whispers. Then she was gone. Lucas and Ethan set up their cameras, EVP recorders, and motion detectors. By midnight, the house had settled into an eerie stillness, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wood. Then, the whispers began. Soft at first, like the rustling of leaves, then clearer. A child's voice giggling in the hallway. Ethan's eyes widened. Did you hear that? Lucas nodded. He picked up his recorder and pressed play. A chilling, breathy voice whispered, "Help me." Ethan stood up abruptly. "Dude, I don't like this." Lucas shushed him and pointed toward the grand staircase. The wooden steps groaned under an invisible weight. Something unseen was coming down the stairs. Lucas lifted his camera, his pulse hammering. Through the lens, he saw a small figure, a girl in a nightgown, her face half burned, her eyes hollow. Rachel. The temperature plummeted. The air smelled of smoke and charred flesh. Then, a whisper brushed against Lucas's ear. "Don't let him in." The lights flickered violently. Ethan backed up, panic rising in his eyes. "Dude, we need to get out of here." Before Lucas could respond, the door to the doctor's examination room creaked open on its own. Inside, the antique examination table was covered in dust, old medical tools scattered across it. Lucas had read that Dr. Gibbons treated patients here, but many had died under suspicious circumstances. Some claimed they still lingered. Ethan swallowed hard. "I swear to God, if something moves in there." A scalpel rolled off the table and hit the floor. They froze. Then, a loud bang erupted from the second floor. It sounded like a body collapsing against the wood. Lucas grabbed his flashlight and ran upstairs. The door to Rachel's room stood slightly ajar. He pushed it open. Inside, the walls were scorched black, the ceiling caving in at the corners. The air smelled thick with burnt fabric, and in the middle of the room, a small bed still sat, covered in ash. Lucas stepped closer. His breath hitched as he saw tiny handprints appear in the dust on the bedsheets, fresh, moving. Then, the whispers grew deafening. A deep, guttural voice rumbled through the house. "Get out!" Lucas stumbled back. Ethan was already bolting down the stairs. The house shook, doors slamming, windows rattling. Shadows stretched and twisted along the walls. A terrible pressure filled the air, pressing against their chests. Lucas barely made it to the front door before it slammed shut on its own. Trapped out, he turned, heart racing. At the top of the stairs stood a tall, shadowy figure. Its eyes burned like embers, and its presence was suffocating. Lucas realized what Rachel had warned him about. This wasn't her. This was something else. Something that had been waiting. The whispers became a chorus of voices, some crying, some screaming, others chanting. The air grew thick, and suddenly, Lucas couldn't move. Ethan yanked at the door handle. "Open, damn it!" A wave of cold rushed past them, and suddenly, the whispers stopped. The door burst open, and they tumbled outside. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the pressure lifted. The house stood silent, unmoving. Mrs. Holloway arrived just before dawn. She took one look at their pale, shaken faces and sighed. "You heard them, didn't you?" Lucas only nodded. Mrs. Holloway glanced up at the house. "You're lucky." Ethan frowned. "Lucky?" She turned to them with a grim expression. "Some don't make it out." The Rhodes Hotel, whispers of the forgotten James Pullman had spent years traveling to the most haunted locations in America, documenting his findings for his small but dedicated YouTube audience. The moment he read about the Rhodes Hotel in Atlanta, Indiana, a place rumored to be teeming with restless spirits, he knew it had to be his next stop. The old two-story building stood at the edge of the small town, its once grand facade now weathered by time. Yellowed windows stared out like vacant eyes, and the wraparound porch sagged under years of neglect. It had served as a hotel in the early 1900s, hosting travelers, drifters, and even gangsters. Some said it had also doubled as a brothel, and many whispered of deaths within its walls, some from illness, others from violence. James set up his cameras as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting the hotel in an eerie twilight glow. He checked his EVP recorder, ready to capture any disembodied voices. The air was thick, as if the very atmosphere held its breath, waiting. 9:00 p.m. The investigation begins. James entered through the front door, which creaked loudly in protest. Dust motes danced in the dim light of his flashlight. The air carried the scent of aged wood and something faintly metallic. Blood, he thought, though he knew that was impossible. He walked into the parlor, where guests had once gathered in the early 1900s. His footsteps echoed against the wooden floors. He set up an infrared camera in the corner, then turned on his EVP recorder. "If there's anyone here," he called out, "make yourself known." Silence. Then, a soft whisper. James froze. The voice was distant but unmistakable, a hushed word slipping through the heavy stillness. He replayed the recording. "Get out." A cold sweat formed on his brow. He had encountered eerie whispers before, but this one carried something urgent. Ignoring the warning, he climbed the staircase to the second floor. The wooden steps groaned under his weight. The hallway was narrow, lined with doors leading to long abandoned guest rooms. At the end of the hall was room 3, said to be the most haunted in the hotel. James pushed the door open. The room smelled of dampness and old fabric. The bed, still covered with a moth-eaten quilt, seemed untouched for decades. He sat in the chair beside it and turned on his spirit box, a device that rapidly scanned radio frequencies, allowing spirits to communicate. "Who are you?" he asked. The static buzzed, then a single word emerged clear as day. "Maggie." James' breath hitched. He knew the name. Maggie was a young woman rumored to have worked in the brothel that once operated in the hotel. Some said she had been murdered by a jealous lover. "How did you die?" James asked. Silence. Then, "Hurt." James shivered. He could almost picture it. Maggie, trapped in this room, her life stolen by unseen hands. Suddenly, a loud bang came from the hallway. James jumped to his feet, grabbing his camera. He swung the lens toward the open doorway. The hall was empty, except for a single door that now stood ajar, though it had been closed moments ago. Heart pounding, he moved toward it. The door led to another guest room, its bed frame rusted, its wallpaper peeling. A child's laugh echoed softly from the corner. James spun around. Nothing. He had read about this. People often reported the ghost of a child in the hotel. Some said he had been the son of a guest who died from illness. Others claimed he had been the illegitimate child of one of the women working there. "Are you here?" James whispered. The temperature dropped sharply. His breath came out in a white mist. Then, Something grabbed his wrist. James yelped, jerking away. A sharp pain burned against his skin. Lifting his arm, he saw 3 red scratches forming before his eyes. That was it. He had seen enough. 2:30 a.m. The escaped James gathered his equipment, his hands shaking. The house seemed to hum around him, an energy growing stronger. He moved quickly down the stairs, but as he reached the parlor, something stopped him cold. A shadow stood by the front door. It was tall, unnaturally still. Not a reflection, not a trick of the light. It was there. James' breath caught in his throat. The figure took a step toward him. The air became suffocating. A deep, guttural voice rumbled through the room. "Leave!" James didn't hesitate. He bolted for the door, nearly tripping down the porch steps. The moment his feet hit the gravel driveway, the oppressive weight lifted. He turned back. The hotel stood in silence, its windows dark and empty. But just as he was about to get into his car, he saw it, a face in the upstairs window. It wasn't Maggie. It wasn't the child. It was something else. Something that did not want him there. James never returned to the Rhodes Hotel. But sometimes, in the dead of night, he would play back the recordings from that night. And every time, just before the whisper telling him to get out, he could hear something else. The widow of Steps Cemetery. The forest surrounding Steps Cemetery was thick with mist, curling around the skeletal branches like ghostly fingers. A biting wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the echoes of sorrow buried beneath the earth. Few dared to wander here after dark, for the legends of Steps Cemetery had endured for generations, chilling the hearts of those who listened. Among the many tales whispered in hushed tones, one stood above the rest, the story of the grieving widow. A grave that never slept. Decades ago, before the cemetery became a site of whispered warnings and ghost stories, a woman named Eleanor Crane would visit the grave of her infant daughter. Some claimed she was a member of a reclusive cult that once held rituals deep in the forest. Others swore she was just a grieving mother who had lost everything. Eleanor had given birth to a sickly baby girl named Lillian. The child never grew strong, and one cold autumn night, she succumbed to an illness that no doctor could cure. The grief consumed Eleanor, driving her to isolation. Every evening, she would visit her daughter's grave, a simple stone marker beneath the gnarled branches of a lone tree. Over time, people began to notice something strange. No matter the hour, no matter the season, Eleanor was always there, rocking in an old wooden chair, her frail body swaying back and forth as if lulling her child to sleep. She never spoke to anyone, never acknowledged visitors, only stared into the night, clutching a bundle wrapped in a tattered blanket. Some claimed they heard whispers on the wind, a lullaby drifting from her lips. Others said the trees themselves bent toward her, as if listening to her mournful song. Then, one night, Eleanor disappeared. A haunting that never ends. The morning after Eleanor vanished, a local groundskeeper, Henry Whitmore, found the cemetery eerily silent. The rocking chair stood empty, though deep grooves in the earth marked where it had swayed for years. The bundle Eleanor once held lay atop her daughter's grave, but when Henry opened it, it was filled with nothing but dead leaves and rotting fabric. People searched the woods for Eleanor, but she was never found. Some speculated she had wandered into the forest and taken her own life. Others believed something darker had claimed her, but even in her absence, Eleanor never truly left. Visitors to Steps Cemetery began reporting strange occurrences. At night, a cold presence would settle over the land, and the sound of a creaking rocking chair would echo through the trees, though no chair remained. Some claimed to see a shadowy figure near the graves, always at the same spot where Eleanor used to sit. A woman in black, clutching something unseen in her arms, her face obscured by a veil. Then came the whispers. People who ventured too close to the tree at night would hear soft murmurs, like a mother soothing her child. Those who dared linger claimed the whispers turned to sobs, then to desperate wails that sent them fleeing in terror. The dare that went too far for years, Steps Cemetery remained a place of unease. Some visited for the thrill, others out of genuine curiosity. Most left with nothing more than a cold chill creeping down their spine. But not everyone was lucky. In the late 1980s, a group of teenagers from Martinsville decided to test the legend. Among them was a boy named Daniel Carter, a skeptic who laughed in the face of ghost stories. His friends dared him to sit beneath the tree, alone, for an hour. Confident in his disbelief, he agreed. The others waited near the entrance, listening to the distant hoots of owls and the rustling of the trees. The wind picked up, and the night seemed to stretch on endlessly. Then came the creaking, slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Daniel brushed it off as his friends trying to scare him, but the noise grew louder, surrounding him. The rocking chair. It had to be. But when he turned, there was nothing. Just the grave, just the tree. Then came the whisper. A lullaby, soft and sweet. A mother singing to her child. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. The air turned ice cold, and an overwhelming grief settled over him like a weight pressing against his chest. He tried to move, but his body refused to obey. Then, he saw her. A woman in a long black dress, standing just behind the grave. Her head tilted downward, a bundle clutched in her arms. The wind blew, lifting the tattered edges of her veil, revealing hollow, sunken eyes that locked onto his. Daniel screamed. His friends rushed to find him collapsed on the ground, shivering and pale. He never spoke of what he saw, but he refused to return to Steps Cemetery. In the years that followed, his once bright personality dimmed. He was never the same. The legend lives on to this day. Visitors claim to see Eleanor wandering the cemetery, forever mourning the loss of her child. Some report hearing her whispers, others see the impression of a rocking chair in the dirt. The bravest souls leave offerings, a small toy, a single flower, hoping to appease the restless spirit. But for those who show disrespect, the widow does not forgive. And if you find yourself at Steps Cemetery after dark, listening to the wind whisper through the trees, be warned, should you hear the creak of a rocking chair when none is there, it may already be too late. From abandoned asylums to haunted hotels, Indiana holds secrets buried in its soil, whispers carried by the wind, and spirits lurking in the shadows. These are just a few of the most haunted places in the Hoosier State, but who knows what other horrors remain undiscovered. If you ever find yourself near one of these locations, listen closely. You might hear the echoes of the past, calling you. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a tale of terror. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and most importantly, stay out of the dark.